the danger of hiding your dark side, there's a part of you you don't want to admit exists. A version of you that you keep locked behind smiles, politeness, performance, and curated identities. It's the part of you that feels rage when you're told to stay calm, envy when others succeed, desire when you're supposed to be disciplined, and despair when everyone expects hope. We all have that shadow. And here's the uncomfortable truth: the more you try to hide it, the more dangerous it becomes. This video is not about demonizing your dark side, it's about understanding why pretending it doesn't exist might be the most destructive thing you can do, not just to yourself, but to everyone around you. Let's start with a scenario. Imagine someone who is always kind, always selfless, always agreeable. They never argue, they never say no, and they seem almost too good to be true. Now ask yourself, what happens when that person finally snaps? What happens when years of suppressed resentment, fear, insecurity, and anger finally erupt? The explosion is often disproportionate. It's not just a moment of frustration, it's a breakdown, it's a betrayal, and a collapse. Because anything you bury alive doesn't stay buried. It mutates. It builds pressure. And it waits for the moment you're weakest to take control. This is the danger of hiding your dark side. You don't eliminate it, you simply hand it the power to sabotage you from the shadows.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
This isn't just poetic metaphor. Carl Jung, one of the most profound psychological thinkers of the modern age, called this the shadow self. He said that every person carries a dark part of their psyche, everything we repress, deny, or disown. But here's the twist: Jung didn't believe the shadow was evil. He believed it was essential. Because within that darkness is also your power, your creativity, your passion, your capacity to protect yourself, but to assert boundaries, to fight for what matters. But if you spend your life pretending to be only light, only good, only pure, you lose access to half of who you are. And worse, that shadow begins to act out unconsciously. You become passive-aggressive instead of honest. You become controlling instead of vulnerable. You sabotage relationships instead of speaking your truth. All because you were afraid to face what was inside you. And let's be real, this isn't just a personal issue. It's a cultural one. We've been trained to filter ourselves, brand ourselves, turn ourselves into digestible, likable versions of what society wants. Show your ambition, but not too much. Be confident, but not arrogant. Be emotional, but only in safe, palatable ways. And whatever you do, don't show people the part of you that's broken, jealous, bitter, or angry. But what if those parts aren't flaws to fix, but signals to decode? What if your darkness is not a problem, but a message? A warning that something in your life is off balance? Let me ask you something brutally honest. What are you afraid would happen if people saw your darkness? Would they leave? Would they stop loving you? Would you lose your job, your reputation, your sense of safety? Or maybe would you finally have to confront the parts of yourself you've been avoiding for years? Because that's often the real fear, not rejection, but self-recognition. What if the parts of you you've labeled unacceptable are actually the keys to your authenticity? Here's the paradox. The more you suppress your dark side, the more it controls you. But the more you face it, accept it, and integrate it, the more whole you become. Think about the people you respect the most. the ones who seem grounded, wise, powerful. I guarantee you they've made peace with their darkness. They've looked into the depths of their jealousy, their rage, their fear, and instead of denying it, they've learned to work with it. That's not weakness. That's mastery. So if you're still living a life where you feel like you're wearing a mask every day, ask yourself, what is it costing me to keep pretending? Because there's a price for hiding your shadow, or a price in intimacy, a price in creativity, a price in your mental health. And sometimes the boldest thing you can do isn't to shine brighter, but to walk into the dark, eyes wide open, and say, I see you. Let's talk. The myth of moral purity, why perfection is a lie that destroys integrity. We live in a culture obsessed with moral purity. Everywhere we look, people are trying to appear flawless, ethically clean, emotionally composed, spiritually enlightened. Social media has become a theater of perfection, where people curate not just their lifestyles, but their virtues. We post about kindness, compassion, equality, progress. We signal our values like badges, hoping to be seen as one of the good ones. But underneath this surface-level display of virtue is a dangerous lie, one that eats away at our integrity like rust beneath polished metal. The lie is that being a good person means being a perfect person. That to be moral, you must never feel rage. That to be spiritual, you must never feel lust. That to be compassionate, you must never feel judgment. But here's the truth. Moral purity is a myth. And chasing it doesn't make you better, it makes you brittle. Let me explain. Integrity does not mean perfection. It means wholeness, and wholeness includes your contradictions. It means you can be both kind and angry, both generous and selfish, both caring and resentful, because you're human. And when you deny those contradictions, when you pretend they don't exist, you don't become more virtuous. You become more dishonest. You split yourself into pieces. You wear one mask for the world and hide another face in the dark. And over time, that mask becomes heavier. You begin to resent it. You lose track of who you really are beneath the performance. This is where the danger shows up, not just psychologically, but ethically. Because when people believe they must be morally pure, they can't afford to admit when they're wrong. They can't confess their flaws because their identity is built on the illusion of flawlessness. So what do? They double down. They justify, they deceive, and they begin to protect the image of goodness instead of doing the work of being good. And that's how corruption begins, not out of evil intention, but out of fear. Fear of being seen. Fear of being human. This fear leads to a kind of moral rigidity that is deeply toxic. People become obsessed with ideological purity. They cancel others for infractions they themselves have committed in secret. They turn every disagreement into a declaration of war. They lose the ability to tolerate complexity, ambiguity, or growth, because growth requires admitting you weren't perfect to begin with. And when you're trapped in the myth of moral purity, that kind of admission feels like death. But here's where philosophy offers us a lifeline. The greatest thinkers throughout history never told us to be perfect, they told us to be honest. Socrates, the father of Western philosophy, didn't claim to know everything. In fact, he was wise because he admitted he knew nothing. He embraced his ignorance as a path to truth. And Jung, whom we mentioned earlier, believed that true morality only arises after we've confronted our shadow, not before. In other words, you can't be truly good until you've come face to face with your capacity to do harm, because only then can you choose not to. Think about that. If you've never acknowledged your potential to lie, cheat, manipulate, or hurt, then your goodness isn't a choice. It's just blindness. But when you know you could lie and you choose to be honest anyway, that's integrity. When you know you could hurt someone and you choose compassion, that's strength. So the goal is not to erase your darkness. The goal is to own it, to see it clearly, and to understand it so deeply that it no longer controls you from the shadows. This leads us to a question that's both terrifying and liberating. What if your moral compass isn't defined by your clean record, but by your ability to face your dirt honestly? But what if the real test of character isn't how polished you appear, but how bravely you confront your imperfections? I'll go one step deeper. What if the parts of you you're most ashamed of are the very parts that, when integrated, could become your greatest gifts? Your anger might become your courage. Your envy might become your ambition. Your grief might become your wisdom. But that transformation can only happen if you stop pretending, if you stop hiding. So here's the challenge: let go of the myth. Let go of the need to be pure. Let go of the performance. Instead, build your integrity around truth, around wholeness, around the willingness to stand in the full mess of who you are and say, "This is me, flawed, complex, evolving, and still worthy of love." Because the people who change the world are not the ones who pretend to be perfect. They're the ones who dare to be real. The shadow has power. How embracing your darkness awakens your greatest strength at some point in life. You realize that the things you spent years trying to hide are the very things that could have made you powerful. That anger you were told to suppress, it was the fuel for your boundaries. That jealousy you were taught to feel ashamed of, it was a signal about your unmet potential. That sadness you tried to ignore, it held the key to your empathy. The shadow, the part of you that contains everything you've rejected, denied, or disowned, is not just a source of pain. It's a source of power, but only if you're willing to face it. Let's break this down. When we talk about the shadow, we're not talking about some mystical concept. We're talking about the aspects of your personality that you've pushed out of conscious awareness because they didn't fit the image you wanted to present to the world. Maybe you were punished for being assertive, so you became passive. Maybe you were mocked for being sensitive, so you became emotionally numb. Maybe you were rejected when you showed desire, so you started to pretend you didn't want anything. These traits didn't disappear. They just went underground. And now, they show up in ways you can't control: explosive reactions, self-sabotage, chronic insecurity, or a sense that something vital is always missing. But here's where it gets interesting. The shadow doesn't just contain your bad traits, it also contains your unlived life. All the parts of yourself you were too afraid to express. Your authenticity, your boldness, your uniqueness. And when you start to integrate those parts, when you stop fighting them and start listening to them, something miraculous happens. You become whole. You stop living a life of fragmentation and start living with alignment. You stop performing and start being. Think of it like this: a tree doesn't grow by just reaching for the light. It grows by sinking its roots into the earth, into the dark, into the unseen. Your shadow is your root system. It grounds you. It stabilizes you. It gives you access to emotional depth, creative fire, and unshakable resilience. But if you cut yourself off from that depth, if you only live in the light, you become top-heavy, fragile, easily knocked over by the winds of life. And this isn't just about psychology. It's about survival. When you don't know your shadow, you're vulnerable. You don't know what you're capable of under pressure. You don't know where your breaking points are. You don't know how you'll act when you're afraid, or desperate, or angry. That ignorance makes you dangerous to yourself and to others. But when you do know your shadow, when you've sat with it, learned from it, made peace with it, then you become trustworthy. Because you've already faced the worst in yourself. You're not afraid of it anymore. And that makes you unshakable. Let me ask you a hard question. What part of yourself have you been most afraid to look at? That question isn't just a prompt. It's a doorway. Because behind that fear is your power. And if you never walk through that door, you will live your entire life in exile from your own potential. This is why the most powerful people are not the ones who are always calm, always composed, always cheerful. The most powerful people are those who have walked into their own darkness and come out the other side with something to offer. They've mined their pain for wisdom. They've turned their flaws into tools. They've made friends with their inner chaos, so they're not thrown off by external chaos. They are dangerous, but in the best way, because they have mastery over themselves. And you can be that person. But it requires courage, the courage to stop pretending, to stop hiding, to stop living halfway. It requires you to stop asking, how can I be good? And start asking, how can I be whole? Because goodness without wholeness is brittle. It breaks under pressure. But wholeness bends. Wholeness adapts, wholeness endures. So if you've been running from your darkness, stop, turn around, walk into it, not to be consumed by it, but to claim what's been lost. Your fury, your hunger, your voice, your truth, all of it is waiting for you there. Integration, liberation, and living without fear, becoming who you were meant to be. The final step in this journey isn't about becoming someone new, it's about becoming who you were always meant to be, before you were shamed, conditioned, or broken into smaller versions of yourself. Integration is the process of returning to that wholeness. Not by erasing your flaws or hiding your darkness, but by weaving every part of yourself, light and shadow, into a unified self that no longer needs to perform, explain, or apologize for existing. Integration is not a one-time event. It's a lifelong relationship with your own complexity. It begins the moment you stop asking, how do I get rid of this part of me? And start asking, what is this part of me trying to teach me? That simple shift changes everything. Suddenly, your anxiety becomes a signal, not a flaw. Your anger becomes a boundary, not a danger. Your sadness becomes a depth, not a weakness. And your darkness? It becomes your edge, the part of you that refuses to settle, that demands truth, that burns through illusion. But to live this way, to live integrated, is not easy. It requires that you feel more, that you risk more, but that you stop chasing comfort and start chasing realness. It means having hard conversations you've avoided for years. It means standing up for yourself when your voice shakes. It means breaking the identity you've clung to so tightly, so that something more honest can emerge. You may lose people who only loved your mask. You may lose opportunities that demanded you stay small. But let me ask you, is that really loss? Or is it liberation? Because the moment you stop hiding your dark side, you stop living in fear. You stop censoring yourself to be liked. You stop shrinking to fit into places you've outgrown. You stop betraying yourself to make others comfortable. And in that space, something incredible happens. You begin to trust yourself deeply, unshakably. You no longer second-guess every emotion, every reaction, every instinct. But you know where it comes from, because you've met every part of yourself. You've walked the edges of your soul and returned stronger. And here's where everything comes full circle. What began as the danger of hiding your dark side becomes the gift of embracing it. You stop living in reaction to who you think you're supposed to be. You start living in alignment with who you are. And that changes the way you show up in the world. You're no longer trying to be impressive, you're trying to be real. You're no longer trying to be perfect, you're trying to be present. You're no longer trying to fit in, you're trying to belong. And the people who are meant for you, friends, lovers, collaborators, community, they find you not through your performance, but through your truth. So let me ask you one last time, what would your life look like if you stopped hiding? If you stopped editing your emotions, diluting your desires, and softening your edges? What if, instead of fearing your darkness, you let it guide you to your deepest truths? Because in the end, the danger was never your shadow. The danger was your silence. The danger was the mask. The danger was the fear of being seen. But now you've seen yourself, you've walked through it. And maybe for the first time, you're not afraid anymore. Welcome to your real life. Welcome to wholeness. Welcome home.